Good morning. The December 21st, 2022 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. For those of us who are attending in person, please ensure that you turn off your phones or at least silence them at this time. There's still a requirement to wear masks at City Hall for all visitors. The board is completely vaccinated as well as boosted. But if you have the opportunity to come and speak before the board, at that time you can remove your mask. For those of you online, please ensure that you stay muted. The board will call you when your testimony or comments are important to whatever topic we're talking about. At that time, if you could please unmute yourself, state your name, the organization you're calling from. At this time, I would like to ask our amazing clerk, Ms. Celeste Amato, for any corrections, additions, or noted abstentions to today's agenda. Madam Clerk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone. Happy holidays. We have the following changes and corrections to note this morning. On page number 4, Mayor's Office of Homeless Services Provider Agreement. Please delete this item. This item was actually approved on the agenda for 12/14/2022. It was just an oops for us. And there is one walk-on item this morning submitted by the Department of Public Works. It's an agreement, and I'm going to share those details now. This is for Project 1352, wet water flow planning and optimization. The vendor is Pure Technologies US Incorporated, and the action requested of the board is to approve an agreement with Pure Technologies US Inc. under Project 1352. The period of the agreement is effective upon board approval for 2 years or until the upset limit is reached, whichever occurs first. The upset is $5,050,000. The Office of Engineering and Construction is in need of Pure Technologies US to identify and design control strategies that allow the real-time operation of the system in an integrated, holistic fashion through the use of machine learning, data analytics, and hydraulic modeling. This morning we have no protests to note. We have the following deferrals and withdrawals. You will notice the agenda does not have a page 36. This item was accidentally kept in the draft and posted, and we have eliminated that page from the final agenda. On page 52 through 53, item number 10, Bureau of Procurement, B5000-5017, background investigations with Kentech Consulting, Inc. This item is being deferred at the request of the President. Items that have been moved to the non-routine agenda are as follows. On page 1, Department of Audits, Audit Report. Page 37 through 38, Department of Law, Settlement Agreement and Release. Page 39 through 40, Department of Law, Settlement Agreement and Release. Page 64, Employees Retirement System, Independent Auditors Report. Page 76 through 81, Department of Finance, Administrative Manual Policy, 118-1 Update. Page 91, Employees Retirement System, Independent Auditors Report. Page 92, Elected Officials Retirement System, Independent Auditors Report, and of course the walk-on item from Department of Public Works will also be part of the non-routine agenda. We have the following abstentions to note this morning. The Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott is abstaining on pages 18, Health Department, Agreement with Johns Hopkins University. Page 21, Health Department, Agreement with Johns Hopkins University. The Honorable President Nick Mosby is abstaining on pages 11, City Council Bill 22-0293, and page 94, Office of the Council President, Retroactive Travel Request. The Honorable Comptroller Bill Henry is abstaining on page 93, Employees Retirement System Travel Request. Deputy City Solicitor Ebony Thompson has no abstentions to note, and Director of Public Works Jason Mitchell is abstaining on pages 108 through 109, items number 13 and number 14, Personnel, Environmental Control Board. And this morning we also have the following no votes to note that are part of the routine agenda. The Honorable President Nick Mosby will be voting no on the following items. Pages 33 through 35, Department of Housing and Community Development, Uplands Rental 2B, 4601 Edmondson Avenue. On page 60 through 61, Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs Grant Agreement. On pages 62 through 63, Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs Grant Agreement. On pages 65 through 67, Department of Housing and Community Development Loan Agreement. And on page 90, Mayor's Office of Homeless Services Agreement. And that completes opening remarks for this morning, sir.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. At this time, I'll ask for a motion to approve and adopt the opening statement.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The opening statement has been adopted. I now would like to direct the board's attention to a memorandum from our office dated December 19th, 2022, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items together with corrections, additions, abstentions, and no votes that have been noted by our amazing clerk. I will entertain a motion to approve all items contained on the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda is adopted. At this time, I see some unreadiness from our comptroller. Ms. Comptroller?
I think we left some stuff off in the opening statement.
Left a bunch of abstentions off. I'm so sorry, my eyes are not working this morning.
It's totally fine. So what we're going to do, we already voted the opening statement. So we're going to go back and amend the opening statement, and then we're going to vote again to adopt it. So at this time, we'll turn it back over to our amazing clerk, Ms. Celeste Amato.
Apologies.
No apology needed.
The Honorable Comptroller Bill Henry has a number of abstentions to note.
Madam Clerk, just so we're very clear, there's only a couple extra ones. Let's just start at the top and read all of the abstentions and just do it as a package.
Excuse me. The Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott is abstaining on pages 18, Health Department, Agreement with Johns Hopkins University, and on page 21, Health Department, Agreement with Johns Hopkins University. The Honorable President Nick Mosby is abstaining on page 11, City Council Bill. City Council Bill 22-0293, and on page 94, Office of the Council President, Retroactive Travel Request. The Honorable Comptroller Bill Henry is abstaining on page 93, Employees Retirement System Travel Request. On page 94, Office of the Council President, Retroactive Travel Request. On page 137, Office of the Mayor, Travel Request. On page 138, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, Travel Request. On page 139, Health Department, Retroactive Travel Request. On page 140, Health Department, Retroactive Travel Request. Page 141, Police Department, Travel Request. On page 142, Department of Transportation, Retroactive Travel Request. On page 143 through 144, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, Travel Request. Page 145, Department of Transportation, Travel Request. And on page 146, Department of Transportation, Travel Request. Excuse me. Again, the Honorable Deputy City Solicitor, Ebony Thompson, has no abstentions this morning, and the Director of Public Works, Jason Mitchell, is abstaining on page 108 through 109, items number 13 and number 14, Personnel Environmental Control Board. And that now actually concludes my abstentions. I'm so sorry.
No apology needed. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the opening statement.
So moved.
Second.
To approve the amended opening statement. So the motion still carries? Should we still have a motion on the floor? Right.
So move.
All right, it's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The opening statement is now adopted. We will, I don't think technically we have to do this, but we'll just do this just in case. At this time, I will also entertain a motion to approve the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda is now adopted. The first item on non-routine agenda can be found on page 1, Department of Audits, Audits Report. The audits are the biennial performance audit, Baltimore City Parks and Recreation for fiscal years ending June 30th, 2021 and June 30th, 2020. The board is requested to note receipt of this audit report. At this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to our auditor, Mr. Josh Pass, and his team to walk us through the audit findings. Mr. Auditor, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, honorable members, or the designees. I'm going to ask for a minute to mute this. My name is Josh Pash. I'm the City Auditor. I am here to present the biennial performance audit of the Baltimore City Parks and Recreations. The outline is, I will cover the audit objectives, scope, and methodologies. I will go over City Code Article 1, Subtitle 39. Then I will present our findings, and then I will present the implementation status of the prior findings. The audit objectives and scope, we were evaluating whether Baltimore City Rec and Parks prioritizes park maintenance projects and whether funds are equitably distributed. We also did a follow-up on prior findings and recommendations included in the previous biannual performance audit, and we are covering fiscal years 21 and 20. For our audit methodologies, we reviewed Baltimore City Code Article 1, Subtitle 39, Equity Assessment Program. We interviewed key individuals from Rec and Parks to obtain an understanding of equity considerations related to operating expenditures for park maintenance and how equity is considered in capital expenditures. We reviewed and analyzed documents not limited to park maintenance, quality assurance, quality control, capital improvement program, training slides, ranking and scoring criteria, project selection documentation, the annual agency equity reports, pull permits, and policies and procedures that are relevant to the audit objectives. We identified related risks and evaluated internal controls over the assessment and consideration of equity in park maintenance and capital projects. Going to summarize City Code Article 1, Subtitle 39, Equity Assessment Program. This code requires city agencies to develop, implement an equity action plan to incorporate and embed equity principles and strategies into city operations, programs, services, and policies. Equity is closing the gaps in policy, practice, and allocation of city resources so that race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and income do not predict one's success, while also improving outcomes for all. The equity assessment is a systematic process of identifying policies and practices that may be implemented to identify and redress disparate incomes on the basis of race, gender, or income. Our first finding is BCRP is not in full compliance with City Article 1, Subtitle 39. We noted that the operating budget for park maintenance, that there is not a process in place to evaluate equity when setting the operating budget for park maintenance. For the capital budget, we noted that Rec and Parks did have their own weighting system to evaluate equity. However, there were not formal policies and procedures to guide staff in the process of scoring and reporting. Further, for capital budget, we noted that they do not have written defined benchmarks to determine how equity points should be awarded to a project in the ranking and scoring. They do have the equity points, but they are not formalized for consistency. They do not have a tracking mechanism to evidence Rec and Parks considerations of community proposed projects in their annual proposed project plans to the Department of Planning. They do not evaluate the impact on equity when funding is reallocated from one project to another after the budget is set and then actual projects are put in place. They have not established an equity plan and a baseline. The equity plan is where you want to go, and the baseline is where you're coming from. They don't consider actual expenditures and the actual location of projects previously completed to evaluate progress towards closing the gap. In other words, to see where you've come from and what's already been done to make that evaluation. Going further, we looked at the 2020 equity report. We noted that there was references that Rec and Parks had referenced that were not included in the equity report. We asked for those, and they stated they were unavailable due to changes in their staffing. We noted that they don't have an established baseline to effectively report their progress in equity, basically where they're coming from. The effects of this that we have identified is that without a baseline, an equity plan, and actual expenditures, and the locations of those previously completed projects, they will not be able to meet and document whether they met Article 3911. And then without effective evaluations of how funds are being allocated, it is less likely that Rec and Parks will achieve the goal to effectively identify and redress disparate outcomes on basis of race, gender, or income. Our first recommendation is that Rec and Parks evaluate and document an equity assessment when setting the operating budget. This was the one where there was no equity assessment done. Establish a tracking mechanism to identify and link proposed capital projects to the project request by community groups on the capital improvement plan. To formally document benchmarks to be used in determination of ranking and scoring, including equity when selecting between operating and capital projects, and to consider the equity impact when funding is moved from one project to the other. Basically, from the budget to the actual doesn't meet, they change to make that evaluation. Further recommendations to establish a baseline and an equity plan, to perform an assessment review yearly, to evaluate the operations of policies and procedures, and their effect, to record actual expenditures and actual locations of previously completed projects that will allow them to analyze progress towards closing the equity gap, to maintain supporting information and documents for the annual equity report, and then to put together formalized policies and procedures so that there's consistency for staff to conduct an equity system of equity assessment of both operating and capital projects, as well as those mentioned prior. The second finding is the Rec and Parks can improve their park routine inspection practices. We noted that Rec and Parks has 263 parks and only 5 park managers. They do not include a required minimum of QA/QC periodic visits. In other words, there's no minimum how many times each park must be visited. They do not document underlying methodologies for which parks are selected for a visit and an assessment. They rely solely on the park manager's knowledge of their assigned parks to determine how best to structure their inspections. In the inspections, the form does not identify and set criteria and guidelines whether there should be a pass or fail for each of the criteria. And then there is no consolidated summary or dashboard of all the QA/QC results, which would allow the managers to have a real-time snapshot of their park evaluations and manage their time to be even more responsive and successful. We noted that each park assessment is its own separate paper form, and if you want to see what that assessment was, you have to pull that individual form. The effects we identified is by not having an underlying methodologies for park visit selections and required minimum, basically there's an opportunity that certain parks will not be visited and will not be addressed, and they might not be considered for inequitable distribution of park manager's time. While without the grading criteria, there could be inconsistency between how different park managers grade their assigned parks. Further recommendations is to determine an appropriate methodology for ensuring that all city parks receive a minimum number of routine inspections, to document the methodology and the minimum number of routine inspections by park managers, to maintain evidence of the QAC inspections, and then to design the QA/QC form to allow for uniformity and evaluation of the various tasks being assessed, and then to consider improving the QAC paper forms, to consider electronic documents, and to consider having IT to build out a dashboard so you can see overall what the assessments are and which parks have been visited. Finding 3. We noted that capital project data is susceptible to intentional, unintentional data loss. This is because the data on potential capital projects is maintained in an Excel file, and that file is accessible to all of the capital project team members, which is between 25 and 30 staff members, and that there is no password protection or editing restriction on those files. The effect is, without restricting access and securing access, there could be either intentional or unintentional data loss or alteration. And we recommend that they implement a data security policy that restricts access to protect data integrity. I will go over the implementation of prior findings now. For Service 645, the percentage of meeting pools maintenance standards, it was not implemented. We noted that in fiscal year 23, 3 of the 25 bodies of water did not have a permit, and in fiscal year 22, 5 of the 25 bodies of water did not have a permit from the health department. We also noted in 645 the percentage of pools meeting maintenance standards. We noted that in our previous audit, that they were overstated, and we noted that the calculation of presenting that to the budget book has not been fixed. That is not implemented. 646 for park maintenance, number of playgrounds with 100% functional components. That is partially implemented. We know that the policies and procedures were approved. However, there was not included guidance on how to select the parks. 654, urban forestry. The number of tree maintenance service requests are received. This is not implemented. They did have the policies and procedures. However, there was not an explanation on how to compare and to deal with service requests and work orders. Previously, we noted that the service requests were done in 311 and the work orders were in a separate system, and there was no link to them, and therefore that led to a large number of requests in 311 that were not in the work order system because some of them were closed but not recorded in both systems. For the urban forestry, the number of tree maintenance service requests received, we noted that they had modified their performance measure to address and to report on their performance, and that was implemented. We had a finding on stockroom inventory. We noted that there was no inventory count, that there was no tracking of inventory, and that it was not recorded. They did not do periodic inventory counts. That was not implemented. And then the concern there is, of course, of reporting inventory and also maintaining what inventory is on hand and what needs to be on hand. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor. At this point, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board? Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry to ask this because Josh goes through the entire audit with us in advance, and so I usually ask all my questions of him then to make sure that I understand a point. But I was going back and realizing that I couldn't remember one of the details in the finding where the pools did not have permits, did not have operating permits. Was that a finding that we didn't have, the Rec and Parks didn't have operating permits because the pools had been inspected, but the permit hadn't been paid for, so it was never issued? Or was it that we don't know if they were inspected?
So the first that you said was the previous audit. In this case, we noted that they were tracking the number of pools that have permits by location. The operating permits are supposed to be given by body of water. So the ones we noted were locations that they had 2 bodies of water.
Okay.
One had an inspection and the other one didn't.
Okay. So that was, okay, thank you.
You okay, Mr.
Yep, that's it.
Are there any other questions from members of the board? No. Hearing and seeing none, we'll call up the Department of Recs and Parks. Madam Chief of Staff.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I bring you greetings on behalf of our Executive Director, Reginald Moore, who's unable to be here today. As it relates to the equity finding, we do accept the findings as provided. I think we would like to take some time to talk about the advancements we have made as it relates to equity. So in addition to some agency-wide training, a part of our REC 2025 plan, we had commitments to look at our policies and procedures as it relates to equity. We have begun in that work. One of the things that we have realized over the last several years is that we didn't have a dedicated staff member to complete this work. It was a part of the portfolio of our Deputy Director of Administration. Given the priority of equity in our agency, that's not enough. So we have recently made a request for a full FTE to take on this work in this portfolio. One of the things that was a part of REC 2025 was our comprehensive plan. We have just launched that work, and we're super excited about what the end result will be. Particularly, the comprehensive plan will give us an equity strategy. It will define equity for us. It will give us equity criteria in which we should judge our work, our capital investments, our programming. So that coupled with the new FTE, we are confident that the next time we are before you as it relates to equity, we will not only be meeting the expectations, we'll be exceeding them. One of the things we also want to highlight is how equity is showing up in our partnerships. We are very proud that we are the first partner of Kaboom on their nationwide quest to address place-based inequity. So we have endeavored and begun that work with them. They will guide how we redress our playgrounds. We believe that each young person in our city should have access to a fully functioning playground. So we're excited. We have a $5 million investment from ARPA to begin that work. And we are super excited about this administration and their support of the agency as it relates to our equity work. We have a $41 million ARPA investment in capital. How we expend those dollars will be guided by the prior years of disinvestment. We have looked at our capital expenditures over the last 5 years, and we are prioritizing those spaces where we have not had investment. So what you can look forward to Rec and Parks is us being a leader as it relates to the equity space in the city. We're excited about it. We've had training as recent as 2 weeks ago for our executive team about therapeutic recreation, how we should be providing recreational services to persons with all abilities. So though we accept the findings as they are laid out today, we want to come before you, let you know that our equity work is well underway. We are confident and excited about where we will go. As it relates to the performance findings that were laid out by the auditor, we also accept those findings. There have been some technicalities that we're working through. The one that Comptroller Henry brought up about the bodies of water. So we get a permit for, let's just say, Druid Hill, there's 3 bodies of water. We now are very clear that we have to have 3 separate permits. So we are continuing to take these findings seriously and adjusting our practices as they relate to them. We do want to bring up, as it relates to our park maintenance and forestry, we have been a part of the Mayor's Initiative for Clean Stat, so our QA/QC is happening. We do accept that there are some tweaks that need to be made, and we have taken those into consideration and are ready to implement those. As it relates to the pools, parks, maintenance, I think I touched on everything, but if there's any other additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
One of the findings talked about the amount of parks as relates to the amount of the amount of resources that personnel that you have to kind of inspect the parks. And I guess one of the critiques in the findings was that, potentially there's concern that maybe grading is more subjective than objective, as well as potentially some parks would naturally get more attention than others. I know that we listed 263 parks in the report. Obviously, all parks aren't created equal in size and scope and accessibility. I have a park behind my house. I wouldn't necessarily call it a park. I would call it like a lawn of grass. With that said, and just, moving away from, I guess, that concern, is there any ongoing discussion inside Recs and Parks, or I'm asking that potentially there will be, where maybe we develop tiers of parks or classes of parks? Clearly, Druid Hill Park is completely different than other parks, right? So, Dewey's Field. So, could you expound on that or talk around that?
So the comprehensive plan is actually also including a park assessment. So we will actually have people to go out and assess our parks so that we can kind of categorize the needs of those parks. Another thing coming out of the comprehensive plan is a staffing plan, right? We know, and we anecdotally think that we don't have enough staff members for our assets, right? We have 263 parks and 60 people who manage those parks, right? So what we're hopeful that the comprehensive plan will show us how many people we need to appropriately and effectively manage our assets, and then we will work with the administration to continue to have those resources align with our needs. So we do know that we have a large inventory. Our staff works extremely hard, but for 60 people and 263 parks in varying degrees, from 200 acres to an acre park, we know that there are opportunities for us to improve our consistency, and we're hopeful with our new changes to our QA/QC process we'll have that. But I think the long-term strategy is to evidence that we need more manpower to provide the level of service the city needs and to make sure that our parks are first-class parks.
Yes, and that kind of just goes into the next point. I think it's great the amount of focus that we, as a city, under this administration, is continuing to put on Recs and Parks and continue to build out from a capital improvement perspective. However, there's the other side of that coin, and that's maintenance, that's upkeep, that's oversight. So when we talk about some of the personnel issues, we also have to factor that in over the longevity, because we want to protect our assets and provide the best experiences for Baltimore City residents. So
Yes.
obviously that's going to be part of that assessment, and I appreciate you going on that. With that, next up, Mr. Comptroller, I think you have a question.
Go ahead.
You have a question?
Let Bill go first, that's fine.
So
Age before beauty.
So I was just telling somebody the other day, I usually try to get in that one first. So
You
so
would lose that one every time.
it's a sarcasm thing. All right. First, I wanted to say it's not just anecdotal. You don't have the resources that you need. As a council person, I spent a lot of time looking at the historical funding and lack thereof for Rec and Parks over the last generation or two, and all through the 90s and the 2000s, funding per capita for Rec and Parks dropped. I'm going to say irresponsibly. And I know that some of the recent administrations have tried to make up for that and we have been increasing the funding for it, but we have a lot of deferred maintenance to make up for. Specifically, in terms of one of the repeat findings. On page 14, the audit found that Rec and Parks had not implemented measures to address the lack of policies and procedures for monitoring and reporting work orders and service requests for urban forestry service. And you touched a little bit on this. I wanted to be specific because the finding from 2 years ago was not addressed, as far as we can tell, because of a change in personnel. Basically, one person retired and another left city employment, so compliance with this finding just stopped. And so what we were going to ask is, do you have a timeline for getting those policies and procedures back in place? And how soon can Rec and Parks come back and update the board on that implementation, and also the steps that you're taking to improve succession planning and knowledge transfer for when an employee retires? And I want to be very clear about this. You're just the people right now that we're looking at, but like, I saw the mayor nodding over there. This is a huge problem citywide, and so don't feel picked on. You're just the people we're asking today.
They
But we're going to be
have one
asking.
of the best
Yeah,
succession
right.
Yeah.
We're going to be asking this question for lots of agencies.
Well, I'm glad you're asking the question. I know everybody's familiar with my human resources background, right?
It's like, that's a softball.
Yeah, so human capital for us is the major resource. So I applaud this administration and what we're doing as it relates to our capital assets. I feel very comfortable that with the support of this mayor and Director Moore's vision, we're going to have the biggest, best rec centers ever, right? The one thing that as a city that I am most concerned on is our human capital. So what described today in one of our failings in that is that we did have a change in personnel. Not only did we have a change in the number 1 position, we had a change in number 2 position and no internal capacity to fill. So we had to start from scratch. That is common in our agency and what I know across the entire city. What we have done as an agency is we have employed our leadership program lead. So we started off in recreation. We're going into our 3rd cohort, and our plan is to have a succession pipeline. We have a mostly millennial workforce, and most of our employees, over 60%, have been there less than 5 years. Wow. Right? So we have people who have been there for a very long time, and they're all newbies. What that means for me as an HR professional is like, how do we make sure that our staff is the best equipped, the best qualified? Recreation and parks is not just like you used to like the garden or you used to play basketball and you can come and work for us. It is a profession. It's degreed, it's credentialed. So what we're doing is trying to make sure that our staff have access to professional development, both on the park side and in the forestry side. We have a tree trimmer apprentice program in forestry to try to build the pipeline, but I want to be very clear to this body and anybody who's listening. There is a human capital crisis in Baltimore City Recreation and Parks and throughout our city. We are working in earnest to address it. Under Director Moore's leadership, we've recently raised all of our wages to $15, so no one in our agency makes less than $15. We have recently made some increases to our recreation staff, but now our park staff, we have to lean into them. We have to continue to evaluate their salaries. I have never seen this type of struggles in recruitment in my entire career, and I've been in different cities and places. Our ability to attract and retain people is harder than it has been. So I implore this body and continue to do the work as we look at our human capital, but investment not only in travel and in professional development, but also in wages and working conditions. So we're working internally in earnest in Rec and Parks to make it a great place to work. And then we're continuing to work with the administration to make those necessary improvements as it relates to salaries, because we are losing people to neighboring jurisdictions. It is a very interesting phenomenon. So I don't want to blame it on the human capital issues, but every time we lose people, we have to start from scratch. So even though they are left with a playbook, it takes any professional 18 months to get comfortable in Baltimore. Even if I think I'm pretty good, it's taken me about 2 or 3 years to get used to Rec and Parks. So I ask for patience as we continue to staff up and to make sure we're keeping our talent and continuing to lean on our administration, who's done a wonderful job in supporting us and trying to do it. But I do want to say we are in a very interesting space. We have to start looking at compensation more than just dollars. We have to be very innovative. So I'd be happy to work on any work group that is impaneled to look at this.
I held back an amen at several points.
Okay.
Well, I've had the opportunity over the past 2 years to go and participate and talk to the cohort of LEAD. I think that is a program that other departments should take on as it relates to the succession issues that we have throughout our city. And Thank you, Reginald Moore, as well as the mayor for your leadership in creating that. At this time, Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First, Mr. President, Mr. Comptroller, I think the Chief of Staff was trying to butter you guys up for a budget increase, but I don't think she had to do that with you two. Madam Chief, I want to go to the pools point really quickly, and I know that we've had, especially over the last 2 years, a lot of problems with pools when we want to open them and the pipe is on 7-8 month delay and all of these things. Can you walk us through the audit? And you heard the auditor talk about how, for example, if we're at we'll just say Drew Hill Park because it has multiple pools and one pool gets inspected but the other one doesn't. How had that happened in the past, and what policies have you guys put in aquatics to make sure that those things happen correctly?
Got it. So throughout the change in administration of who was leading the issuance of permits for pools and there was a time period where we didn't pay for permits. It was a very interagency type of situation. It came up in an audit that we actually know you don't get it passed. You actually need a physical permit. So we begin to endeavor into that process. So from our vantage point, the entire campus is evaluated, but we are only issued one permit. So we know we have to work closely with our partners in the health department to make sure that they are doing one for the kiddie pool and one for the large pool. So we don't operate any pools without being inspected. I want to be very clear about that our pools are inspected and safe for the citizens to use, and we are working through internally how we evidence that those inspections have happened. So we will not, and the health department doesn't just give us carte blanche. We have to make repairs, and we are usually working to the opening day to make sure that we have checked off those requirements that they have for us. So I want to be clear, we do have all of our bodies of water inspected. We need to get permits issued for each separate body of water, and that's been made very clear to us.
And thank you. And to my colleague's point, we'll talk about the HR thing for a second. We all know that the world has changed, and people in every profession across the globe have changed what they're going to do. But as a former Rec and Parks employee, actually, I will say, having worked here in City Hall, and we thought that our technology and our equipment and things were bad, I have never worked in a place with worse technology than 3001 East Drive. Mr. Comptroller, Mr. President, we know you guys hit the nail on the head that this agency has been severely disinvested in for most of our lifetime.
All of our lifetime.
All of our lifetime. We can't say the same for you, Mr. Comptroller. but
I remember back when there were 90 rec centers in Baltimore City.
well, we don't remember that, Mr. Comptroller. But in all seriousness, and now that we have made this big effort to improve the physical spaces, we know that we have to make sure that we're training, and there's a whole generation of folks who we know we can attract into Rec and Parks. So I want to say thank you, Madam Chief, for your leadership on trying to make sure that we're growing that next breed of Rec and Parks employees. But the last point, to the equity point, we know specifically on capital projects that you guys are doing these projects based in equity, and we know that the planning department also, when you present those, goes through an equity score, and when they present it to me, that's of course the first thing that I'm looking at, as you know very well. But can you walk us through, in thinking about the recent investments in capital that Rec and Parks has done and the pending, like the 5 rec centers in design, and where they are and how they hit at the equity point for the board, please?
Yep. Well, I think our biggest equity win right now, I'm going to take some time to talk about Middle Branch Fitness and Wellness Center. If you have not yet had the opportunity to go down to Cherry Hill to see that investment, that's what equity looks like in Rec and Parks, right? So if we take Cherry Hill in that neighborhood and generations of disinvestment, it now has the biggest, brightest, baddest rec center, bad meaning good, in the city. So those are the types of investments and boldness that I'm super proud of the leadership of Director Moore. He always tells a story about one of his first big decisions in the city was convincing the Cherry Hill community to move the location of that rec center. We have a bold visionary who is very clear about how he wants to change the narrative. Excited about the work that we have, so now we can evidence it between the work that Kaboom is doing with us for place, space, and equity. We'll be able to evidence where we should be taking our playgrounds. When we get the report back from the comprehensive plan, we'll be able to tell over the next 10 years where our capital investment should be. And in that interim, our Chief of Capital Development, Adam Borman, and Director Moore have been very intentional of looking at where the investments have been over the last 10 years and making sure that we move away from the process of taking 5 years to fund a project piece by piece by piece and starting to make real investments so we can have shovels in the ground and bring real assets to the city. So we have been making these strides internally. These outside sources will help us better evidence the work that we have done, and then we'll be able to coalesce our resources and our asks together so that we won't have these small pet projects that get put into our lap that are not in part of the strategy. One of the things that we have found of having all these random work plans and comprehensive they don't come together. They are plans that people got made with no commitment to funding. So the comprehensive plan is going to take on all of that work and say, listen, here's where you should be investing. Here are the areas where there's been disinvestment. Here are the areas where there are no resources or inadequate resources, and here's where you should go. So we're super excited about it. It's a 14-month process. We just launched 2 weeks ago, so you all should be hearing from us shortly about the findings from that. But in the meantime, internally, equity is important to us, how we show up for our staff, how we provide opportunities for them. So equity is the guiding principle, and though we accept the findings today, again, Rec and Parks will be a leader in the city in how equity is shown through our service and through our staff.
And just for the record, the 5 centers that are in design, where are they?
I knew you were going to ask me that question today.
I know the
in
answer,
front
but
of
I figured,
everybody.
yeah.
I will yield to you, Mr. President, because I don't have
You
those in
can't
front of
yield.
Well, just
Director Moore is the capital man. I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I wouldn't have it right here.
just so for the record, they are Chick Webb, Parkview, Gardenville. I know I'm missing one there. Oh, Curtis Bay.
Curtis Bay.
And what's the 5th one? Ooh.
5. There are 5, Mr.
5.
President.
I'm missing the 5th one, Mr. President. I'm sorry. I'll give you the 5, the
Yes,
5th one.
there are 5.
Thank you, Madam Chief.
Thank you.
Mr. President, may
Yes,
I ask a
Madam
question?
Solicitor.
Good morning. I just would, just to your point, I just wanted to highlight something. Could you talk a little bit about how the opening and expansion of Rec and Parks is going to help with the Squeegee Initiative, and how you all have recently been roped in, and how that will facilitate different outlets that our young people can go to really have alternatives?
Yep, absolutely. So one of our major goals with Rec 2025 was to increase opportunities for young people for employment and for volunteerism, right? So when we have places and spaces like Cherry Hill where young people are from those neighborhoods and are aligned to the adults that are there, there's an opportunity for them to come and to serve in our spaces. In addition to what's happening at Cherry Hill, we are launching some teen spaces that will be staffed by teens, for teens, and designed by teens. So we hope to launch that in early spring, but we have 5 different rec centers where they'll be staffed by teens. They'll have teens who paint out the paint color and the furniture, and then we'll offer some program that's more intentional to teens. We do a really good job with our adolescents. We are now leaning into making opportunities for teens where we want our spaces to be welcoming, to have the type of amenities that they would like to enjoy. So Cherry Hill, it will be an ideal place where we will have much more young people employed in our organization.
And I just wanted to shout them out because I'm a former Central Rosemount pool attendant. All right, graduated to lifeguard. So Rec and Parks is just a huge part in our youth, and I just wanted to elevate that and highlight that. And thank you so much for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Solicitor. At this time, any additional questions or concerns? Hearing none, this report will be noted. The audit will be noted. The next item on the non-routine agenda can be found on pages 37 and 38, Law Department Settlement Agreement and Release. The request is to approve a settlement agreement and release of a lawsuit filed by Jamar Bowles, who filed the lawsuit against the Baltimore Police Department, Detective Herschel of BPD's Gun Trace Task Force, as well as 6 other officers. On behalf of the Law Department, we have...
Mr. Jim Corley on WebEx.
Oh, Mr. James Corley on WebEx. How are you doing?
I am well, Council President. How are you this morning?
Pretty good. Before we get started, Mr. Corley, do you have the name of the other 6 officers?
I do.
Is it readily available for you?
I have their last names listed here. Let me get their first names for you.
Okay. As a matter of principle, when we bring settlements above, can the Law Department also just read in all the names? I think that's important from a transparency perspective to the public.
Absolutely, Council President. It's Daniel Herschel, John Burns, Stephen Romy, Peter Iacovo, Jordan Moore, Timothy Romeo, and Howard Ilgenfritz.
Thank you so much.
In this matter.
And Mr. Corley,
Yes, sir.
during your testimony, if you could just And you guys always do a great job, but provide us with the timeline so folks can understand and know like the historic nature of what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. So in the first case, and both of these cases are very similar other than the dates involved. Mr. Bowles was arrested on two separate occasions, in August of 2013 and March of 2014. BPD officers, Detective Herschel and his fellow officers were patrolling a known drug trafficking area in Baltimore City when they observed plaintiff engaging in behavior consistent with a CDS transaction. They stopped and detained him, after which they recovered both cash and drugs. Plaintiff was charged with various CDS violations, including possession with intent to distribute, and he ultimately pled guilty to one charge for each of those arrests, serving approximately 2 years of incarceration as well as 3.5 years of parole. In 2019, the state's attorney's office moved to vacate Mr. Bowles' conviction on the basis of justice and fairness because the lead officer, Detective Herschel, had been indicted and convicted relating to racketeering charges in 2018 arising from the GTTF investigation. And that caused credibility questions relating to Mr. Bowles' arrest and conviction. As a result, the court vacated Mr. Bowles' conviction and the state's attorney's office dismissed all charges. Following that, in 2022, plaintiff filed a federal lawsuit alleging that there was no probable cause for the officers to have stopped him on either occasion and that the drugs recovered were planted by Detective Herschel and or the other officers. His claims included both federal claims of malicious prosecution and failure to supervise, as well as a state claim for violating the Maryland Declaration of Rights. Both this case and the next one face the same issue, wherein the plaintiff alleges that the arresting officer planted drugs on them before arresting them for possession of those drugs. And the only evidence as to whether the drugs were planted as opposed to properly found pursuant to searches incident to arrests would be the testimony of the officers and the plaintiffs themselves. And in a he said, she said situation, that issue would ultimately go all the way to a jury trial where it would become a question of credibility for the jury as to who to believe. Given the issues of credibility of any officer related to the GTTF and the specific histories of the officers involved in these cases, even though most of them have never been criminally charged with misconduct. In this case, Detective Herschel obviously was convicted of racketeering charges, but he was not convicted of planting evidence. But we are not confident that we would obtain a favorable verdict from a jury. Additionally, when weighing the odds of trial success with the defense costs associated with litigating these types of cases for 2 or more years and the risks associated with a trial verdict in plaintiff's favor, which includes the payment of plaintiff's attorney's fees if they get a successful verdict, it was determined that it was financially beneficial for the city to settle these cases up front without incurring any defense costs or fees for amounts that were significantly less than the averages of all other GTF cases to date. To date, not including these settlements, the law department has settled 35 separate cases arising from the Gun Trace Task Force investigation with an average settlement of $443,000 per case. On its face, this settlement and the next one are both more than $100,000 below that average. Moreover, most of those cases were litigated for multiple years, adding significant expenses related to the legal fees and expenses for each defendant as required by the Local Government Tort Claims Act, causing the city to sometimes spend more than $100,000 in outside defense fees and costs in addition to the ultimate settlements. Therefore, based on a review by the Settlement Committee of the Law Department, a recommendation to settle is made to settle this matter for $330,000, after which plaintiff has agreed to dismiss the suit and all claims arising from this in perpetuity.
Does that conclude your presentation, Mr. Corley?
As to this case, yes, Council
Thank you
President.
so much. At this time, I'd like to call on Madam Solicitor. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you so much, Mr. Corley. If you could just go over, just so the board understands how many active cases that we have still with GTTF, and then also I understand we have a recently filed case and the one that's unfiled, but can we go over just what the outstanding number is so that we can all sort of keep track?
Absolutely, Madam Solicitor. So there are 5 active cases, including the most recent case, which was just filed on Saturday this past week. One of those cases we believe is 100% barred by the statute of limitations. We're just waiting for a collateral issue to be resolved. And then there is one unfiled claim that we are aware of that the statute of limitations would run in approximately 4 months if no further action is taken. The one case that we have that is probably the largest risk is Shirley Johnson versus the Baltimore City Police Department, which is the case where an innocent civilian was caught up in a car accident caused by a car chase where Umar Burley and Brent Matthews were fleeing the scene of an attempted stop. So there's 5 active cases, including the newest one, and one unfiled claim. And based on the timeline, given that the indictments were in 2017 and convictions in 2018, the statute of limitations should have run on nearly every other claim, as we don't have any Local Tort Claims Acts notices in our files related to anything else.
Perfectly. And I know this is a topic that's near and dear to Mr. President. I just want to go over it and make sure that my records are correct when I have you double check me here. As we've read in the officers that were involved here, I understand that former Detective Herschel has been terminated. He is not receiving a pension. However, there is Sergeant Burns that's active. We have Officer Romy that's active. We have Sergeant Moore that's active. We have Sergeant Romeo that's active. And to date, I just want to explain, if you could, while in the interest of fairness and justice, that no charges have actually been brought against these officers for this particular incident. And while they are active, it would seem like things would be, or charges would be brought against them, that in this particular incident, that this was not just because they were involved and listed as officers, that the wrongdoing wasn't found against these officers that are active. I just want to highlight
Correct.
that.
The motion to vacate the conviction by the state's attorney was based solely on the fact that the lead officer who collected the drugs was convicted. I believe the state's attorney had made a public statement at the outset of the GTTF investigation that it was reviewing all convictions arising from GTTF arrests. And in any case where there was no corroborating evidence that was not provided by a GTTF officer, that they were going to vacate those convictions because there was a question. Not that there was actually evidence of wrongdoing in this case, but because they could no longer vouch for the credibility of the lead officers, again, in the interest of fairness and justice, to avoid any injustice due to the credibility issue, they were vacating those convictions. And most of those plaintiffs, or most of those who had their convictions vacated, had already been released and had served their time, because these arrests were typically in the early 2000s, 2010, 2011. So in these cases, Mr. Bowles had served his time and was already out on parole and had that released. And this was just a motion to remove the conviction from his record to avoid any taint. But there is no evidence of any wrongdoing in this case or the other case.
Thank you.
And thank you, Madam Solicitor, for proactively putting that on the record and not having me ask my redundant question every time we talk about BPD settlements.
It's important.
Yeah, it is really important. The only thing I'll say is, and the point that I was making of us listing the officers, obviously they are part of the suit. I think it should be standard practice of the board moving forward. And how maybe officers had absolutely nothing to do. It's just the level of proximity, right? And we know that has been part of the problem and some of the cultural issues that the dissent decree and situations like the GTTF situation has created. Officers that may not directly engaged in some of the wrongdoings, but some officers, again, not all, we can't speak for who and who not, but some officers potentially being in proximity to it. So that was the point of it. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The item is approved. The next item on the non-routine agenda can be found on pages 39 and 40, Law Department Settlement and Release. This request is to approve the settlement agreement release of lawsuit filed by Alex Holden, who filed a lawsuit against the Baltimore Police Department officers Jason Giordano as well as Jimmy Shetterly. Mr. Corley, on behalf of the Law Department, the floor is yours.
Yes, Council President, and those are the only two officers named in this suit, as well as BPD itself. On May 3rd, 2012, the officers Giordano and Shetterly were patrolling a known drug trafficking area in the city, and they observed plaintiff engaging in behavior consistent with a CDS transaction. When they attempted to stop and detain Mr. Holden, he fled. Officer Giordano witnessed the plaintiff discard a white plastic package while fleeing, and after the officers caught and arrested Mr. Holden, they recovered the package, finding several bags of suspected CDS. Plaintiff was charged with various CDS violations and again pled guilty to possession with intent to distribute, after which he served more than 2 years of incarceration and an additional year of parole. In 2019, the state's attorney moved to vacate his conviction on the basis of fairness and justice because during Detective Herschel's 2018 trial, one of his fellow GTTF officers, convicted officer Mamadou Gondo, testified that he had distributed money stolen from suspects to other officers, including Officer Giordano, which raised questions regarding Officer Giordano's credibility relating to Mr. Holden's arrest and conviction. As a result, the court vacated Mr. Holden's conviction and the state's attorney's office vacated those charges. In 2022, the plaintiff filed the current federal lawsuit alleging that there was no probable cause for him to be stopped and that the drugs recovered as a result of that stop were planted by Officer Giordano. For the same reasons before, the $315,000 settlement here is well below the average and prevents the ongoing litigation costs related to both outside counsel as well as the internal labor costs of the law department to litigate these issues for more than 2 years when this ultimately comes down to a credibility issue for the jury. And for the same reasons that the state's attorney's office vacated the conviction, the law department is not convinced that we would be able to obtain a favorable verdict from a jury on this issue. Accordingly, we have asked that the board recommend approve a recommended settlement of $315,000 to Mr. Holden, after which he has agreed to dismiss this suit and all claims arising out of this arrest in perpetuity. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Corley. At this time, are there any questions or concerns from members of this board? I guess in interest of consistency, do you have information on both officers and their eligibility for pension?
Yes, Council President. Both Officers Giordano and Shetterly are still active on the force. Neither of them faced any disciplinary action related to this, as there's no evidence of wrongdoing. This was simply a movement to vacate the conviction based on the implication by former Officer Gondo that he had given money to Officer Giordano.
Thank you. And before we close out, do you have, and if you don't, it's fine, do you have the total amount paid out to date with these two additional settlements added?
Yes, Council President, including these two, it's $16.1 million over 37 cases.
So I wonder, Madam Chief of Staff, who was just up here talking about Rex and Parks, and we talk about the level of disinvestment, not only in Rex and Parks, but throughout our community. This $16.1 million, folks, represents a lot more than $16.1 million. The residual effects of what these officers and their wrongdoings have done, not only to our city, not only to communities, but more importantly, to residents in the city, far exceeds $16.1 million. A lot of years lost, a lot of families divided, a lot of distrust in our communities. I know that I'm not just speaking for myself. I speak on behalf of many of us that sit up here. But when we see these settlements that we have to do, and we appreciate the law department and your thorough nature of presenting it to us, as well as your good representation from the city of Baltimore, ensuring that you protect not only the interests of the citizens that are impacted, but also the residents that you represent through the law department. We truly appreciate it, but we understand and know that this is unnecessary. Obviously, we are all taking steps and strides to ensure that this never, ever happens again. Unfortunately, we've been down this path too many times where we've said that as a government, and we consistently see this over and over. The one thing I would like to point out to folks listening and the residents, this particular case dates back to 2012. That is 10 years ago. So again, the residual effects of that, not only as it relates to the capital amount that, or the expense that we have to pay out, but also more importantly, the human element of it all is very, very troubling and concerning. With that, are there any additional questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye. All
Aye.
opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. The next item on our routine agenda can be found, thank you, Mr. Corley, can be found on page
Thank you.
64, Employees Retirement System. The board is requested by Clifton Larson Allen, LLP, an independent auditor of the Baltimore City Fire and Police Employees Retirement System, to note receipt of an independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters. At this time, from Clifton Larson and Allen LLP, we have a representative. The floor is yours.
Thank you, members of the board. My name is Remy Omasor. I'm a principal with CLA, and we perform the audit for the Baltimore City Fire and Police Employees Retirement System for the year ended June 30, 2022. We met with that pension systems board back in November. I communicated our audit results to them as well. And we're here to do a similar action with the board today. There are a couple of things I wanted to convey to you, just as you get ready for your holiday parties. If you like to talk audit like me, you have a couple of talking points to go through. We were engaged to audit the audit of the plan. In conjunction with that audit, we issued several documents. One related to internal control matters, i.e. if we saw deficiencies, control systems that had issues, we would include those in that letter. As well as a communication with governance, basically has the same type of items that I would say here today. So if you wanted this in writing, you could always go back and grab it. In conjunction with the audit, there's two things that we have to do and say, i.e. management is responsible for the financial statements. We are responsible for our audit opinion. I.e. when you take a look at those documents, management prepared the 100 or so pages. We've got two in the front that says we audited those pages, and they're good in a material respect that you can rely on the data in that report. Whenever I speak in front of a board, I like to start with the conversation about risk, because that's what an audit basically does, address risk related to the financial statements and the underlying processes that go into preparing those financial statements, and convey to you the items that we saw as items of higher risk. With that being said, there's two that come up pretty consistently in our industry: management override of controls, as well as revenue recognition. I.e. if you have a process that works, management can go in and say, hey, change this to X, Y, and Z. We go through from an audit perspective looking for those types of adjustments, and then of course making sure revenue or investment income is recorded in the proper period, which basically hones on to the biggest risk that we see with pension systems, which is really the recognition of revenue related to the alternative investments, i.e. Private equity funds, things of that nature. Necessary from a return standpoint, so we see it consistently across the industry, but one that we still have to look out from a risk standpoint nevertheless. In regards to results of our audits, we had no significant deficiencies, internal controls, or material weaknesses, i.e. findings. We issued an unmodified or clean opinion that basically says you can rely on the information presented in the financial statements. In conjunction with all audits, we follow generally accepted auditing standards. Basically says you have to go through on a risk-based approach, looking at the processes as well as the numbers in the financial statements, and perform procedures on those numbers till we get to a comfort level. If you read through the financial statements, the various accounting policies that the system has elected, i.e. how we value investments, how we record contributions and benefit payments, et cetera, are listed in Note 2 to the financial statements. Again, nothing that came to our attention that would be out of the ordinary or cause concern from an audit standpoint. There were no items that we mentioned that were disagreements with management, items of controversy that we went through from an audit perspective that we would make governance aware of. So from that standpoint, no issues or items that we'd have to convey here to the board. And then last but not least, I do like to talk a little bit about where we spend the most of our time from an audit standpoint. So investment balances, contributions, benefit payments, we test those on a sample basis, looking at how we value them, recalculating benefit payments that are paid out to make sure they're in accordance with statutes. We take a look at all significant internal control processes. Again, how we do those payments, how we calculate them, how we prepare the financial statements. And then, of course, we always go through an independent check of the financial statements to make sure that they're clear and concise as they can be from an audit and GAAP perspective, so that a reader can pick up those financial statements and take a look at them and understand what happened during the year. With that being said, again, no items that we would have to convey from a governance perspective, no internal control findings. We issued a clean opinion, and from our standpoint, we always like to thank managements for their time and effort. An audit is never easy. We ask a lot of questions. We poke at them a lot. So again, thank them for their time and effort in conjunction with the audit. With that, I will turn it over for any questions that I have from the board.
Thank you so much. At this time, are there any questions or concerns? Hearing and seeing none, we truly appreciate your presentation. It was very
Thank you.
thorough. Is there someone here from Employment Retirement System? Fire to police, yes. That's the report we're on, yes, sir. You can come forward. Yep. Obviously, you were given a clean report, but the board still likes to provide an opportunity for everyone to speak. If you could state your name, your position, your title, and anything that you have that's germane to what the information that was just provided to the board.
My name is Howard Mosovitz. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the Fire and Police Retirement System. I don't have anything. There was a clean opinion. We did lose about 8% this year after almost a 30% gain the previous year. So as you know, the market goes up and down, but
Thank you.
that's about it.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions or concerns? Hearing and seeing none, we appreciate your time in coming out. So this report, I'll entertain a motion to note this. We don't have to do a motion, but this report will be noted. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next item on the non-routine agenda can be found on pages 76 to 81, Department of Finance. This request is to approve replacement of electronic communication policy 118-1 with the proposed acceptable use policy. On behalf of the Department of Finance, we have Mr. IT Director to come present to us. So the floor is yours.
Good morning, Council President, Mr. Mayor, Comptroller Henry, and esteemed members of the board. Finally, I stuck the landing on that. It's kind of hard for me. My name is Todd Carter. I'm the CIO for Baltimore City. I brought with me Kevin Carney. He's the Chief Information Security Officer. And Kevin has a presentation he'd like to briefly go through. It's a very quick presentation, 44 pages. We'll get through it fairly quickly. No, just
You got the man.
but it'll explain, and then we'll answer any questions that may come up.
Good morning, members of the board. Wanted to, thank you for the opportunity to provide you with a background on the proposed acceptable use policy. Let me see if I can figure out how to share out. There we go.
We hope the IT department can figure
We are hoping so too. Share. Yay. All right.
Got it.
It works.
Who would have thought? So the background is that every year we look at policies that need to be updated, or we look for policy gaps. One of the policies we identified for working in calendar year 22 was acceptable use. An acceptable use policy is foundational to the IT security of an organization. It sets expectations for protecting data and for the use of IT resources. I could not find an acceptable use policy. The closest we had was an electronic communications policy from 2016. It's a good policy, a little dated, but it really only was scoped to cover electronic communication. And our challenge there is the IT world has evolved, certainly. If you look at our devices now, our smartphones have powerful processors and can communicate to the web and of course, can process data. We can make calls on our laptops. Our desk phones have processors with software specialized for voice communication. So it didn't make sense to have two separate policies. We would have to keep them in sync, and if they got out of sync, it could cause confusion. So we have a security council that we formed back in 2020. The Security Council consists of the larger agencies in the city, and those agencies have their own IT department. We use the Security Council to talk about upcoming initiatives. We talk about governance, and we help them to prepare for these initiatives, and we seek feedback. We want to understand the impact. So we briefed the Security Council in April of 2020. We showed them our recommendation and also went over some recommendations from a company called Gartner. They do IT consulting, and I won't go through all those recommendations, but we tried to follow the Gartner recommendations. So in terms of the development process, I carefully went through the old policy, AM 118-1. I mapped all of the policy requirements into the new acceptable use policy, except for two. There was a email etiquette, which we would be better off really in a communications etiquette policy, and end of use. End of use has changed since 2016. We now have Workday, and we use Workday. We get daily reports, and that's how we know to disable accounts. We also updated the scope to make it all-inclusive. We got the draft scope from the Gartner organization, and then I work with the law department. We now broadly include all technology in use in the city, and we also include our entire user community. We did a pre-review of this acceptable use policy. We briefed the Security Council in April. We released a draft to Security Council, DHR, Law Department. We had an opportunity to brief Director Carter's IT Steering Committee in June. We took all of that feedback and put it into a proposed draft. And then we followed AM 002-1-2. We again briefed the Security Council, let them know it's coming. And we sent it to all agency directors and chief of staffs on 7/28, asked for a turnaround of 3 weeks, sent a reminder, and even extended it due to vacations, right? August is a busy time. And then we carefully went through all of the feedback, responded to the comments, and then the next step in the process is to send the final to DHR, Law, and OLC. And everything was approved on October 6th. The memo was released on 11/9, which gets us to here. The next slide is just a sample of some of the comments we got. We got 29 comments. I initially responded to each comment, and then I did the research and gave everybody a final disposition. So we're asking the board's approval. The last update for electronic telecommunication was 2016. Technology has evolved. This has been thoroughly vetted, and we really need an acceptable use policy for the city.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for that. Just one quick question. When we talk about communication now, it's not just like email, but also social media. I didn't really see, I don't think it really touched that. Is there a point that is there something else that kind of addresses that, or is there a point that we'll involve to kind of rope in social media and the advancement of social media moving forward into the policy?
Yeah, in working with the law department, I understand we do have a social media policy. So that would be in effect for that part of our communication.
So that will fall outside of the acceptable use policy?
Correct.
Yeah. With that policy, do we talk about, do we restrict any applications from a social media perspective?
I'm not familiar with that policy, so
Okay.
I can get back to you on that if you like.
Yeah, we could talk about that. Are there any other questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. Thank you, Director Carter, and thank you, Deputy. The next item on non-routine agenda can be found on page 91, Employees Retirement System. The board is requested by UHY LLP, an independent auditor of the elected officials retirement system and employees retirement system of the city of Baltimore, to note receipt of the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters. These reports are based on audits of the system's fiscal year 2022 financial statements performed in accordance with the government auditing standards. From UHY, we have, please come up, say your name and your title, and begin your presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, other members of the board. My name is Jason Ostrowski, audit principal from UHY, and here today to present the audit results for the employees' retirement system as well as the elected officials' retirement system. So I'll try not to be too redundant from my fellow auditor, Remy. He did a great job of kind of giving an overview. So I like to kind of
speed too.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to be faster. Don't worry. So I like to jump right to the headline. The primary purpose of our audit is to issue an opinion on the financial statements, and happy to report that we issued a clean, unmodified opinion on both the employees' retirement system as well as the elected officials' retirement system. So we actually do 2 audits as part of this. We issue 2 separate opinions on each of those, and again, clean audit opinion. Also, under government auditing standards, we also issue what's called a report on internal controls and other matters and over compliance. And happy to report we had no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. We did issue 1 management letter comment, which is, we call that an other matter. And so, again, not a material weakness or significant deficiency, but more of a best practice. And so from our testing, we did identify, and this is related to contributions and information provided by the Department of Education, which is a very small percentage of the ERS system. We noted during testing our census data, so when we test that actuarial information and the information that goes into calculating the actuarial liability, we test that census data, which is the underlying data that goes into it. And in doing that, we identified there was 572 members of the Department of Education that were listed as having 0 contributions. And essentially, the cause of that is a little bit of a disconnect in the way that the information is sent over to the retirement system, and there's not a lot of visibility back in the Department of Education as far as the information that's being sent over. So that's kind of the crux and the cause of the issue. And so we had some recommendations establishing policies and procedures to review that information on a recurring basis, and then also getting a little bit more visibility into the information being reported by the Department of Education. There were some uncontributed contributions that do ultimately flow through the employer contribution on that side from the Department of Education, but are required member contributions that were not made. So ERS has gone through the process of quantifying that and then working with the Department of Education to collect those unpaid contributions from the members. And then also developing policies and procedures on an ongoing basis to ensure that the information that obtained from the department is accurate and proper. So basically getting that visibility and having some look into the information that's being provided. So again, not a material weakness, no effect on the report or the financial statements that's material, but just kind of an other matter that we highlighted and presented to the board. I'll pause there. Any questions on that?
No, that's good. I think the Baltimore City school piece that you brought out was probably a byproduct of the change of responsibility associated with the pension. I believe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, there was a change where it was shifted over to the school system away from the city or something like that. So I'm sure that that's probably somehow related to the ghost employees or whatever.
Yeah, and there was some legislative change that added that member contribution as well, so that was kind of a new aspect. And, the recent past. So yeah, so really that, again, recommendation is just kind of working with the department and having some clarity into that. Then also as part of our audit, I think you should have also received our required communications. There's a letter that we issued to the governing body, to the board, as well as Board of Estimates. I think Remy went through a lot of those. What do we do as an auditor? What management's responsibilities are? There were no major new significant accounting policies issued for governmental retirement systems this year. We also always do like to highlight, I think you highlighted a little bit, judgments and accounting estimates, so 2 significant estimates. He talked about the valuation of those alternative investments. Also that actuarial information's another significant estimate related to the footnotes. We reviewed those and found them to be reasonably stated in relation to the financial statements. And then, as always, it's a pleasure working with David and the team over at ERS. Very cooperative, gave us everything we need. Tutu does an awesome job. As far as getting everything and working with management, nothing to report there. Again, very cooperative and professional. And then also the last thing included with that governance communication is a management representation letter. That's required under audit standards. It has various representations from management to us. Also good to review that. And it's management essentially representing that they provided us with all the information we requested, that they're not aware of any material misstatements, that the financial statements are properly presented. So with that, I'll open it up to any additional questions.
Thank you so much. At this time, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, truly appreciate the presentation.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Someone here from Retirement Systems? David, if you could please take the mic. Tell us your name as well as your title.
Good morning, members of the Board of Estimates. My name is David Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Employees Retirement and the Elected Officials Retirement System.
And any points you would like to note, or
just one thing that Jason had mentioned. The city Employees Retirement System, we have 2 plan sponsors. It's the City of Baltimore, and we also have the Board of Education. And both plan sponsors are required to make contributions, as well as the employees. There's been some disconnect between the Board of Education with their systems. We are working with the CFO and the CEO, Dr. Sonia, to get that issue resolved. And financially, we only lost 3% as compared to the F&P this year, so we are doing good. The elected officials are on solid ground. They're 142% funded, so we're in pretty good shape.
There was a lot of recent discussion about the elected official
Yes, it was.
Pension program, but we won't have that at this discussion today. We appreciate you. Are there any additional questions or concerns? Hopefully the journalists will tweet about that or talk about that, but we appreciate you today.
Thank you for calling attention to the not quite rivalry between the F&P systems.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
It's always been that way.
We saw him perking up in the back. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
We have to vote this out. No, we just note this as well. So this will be noted as well. Let's see. We do have one additional item. I believe that's the last, Madam Clerk. That's the walk-on item. This item is related to project number 1352, which is a sewer optimization study that has potential to reduce capital costs of the modified consent decree, Phase 2, on behalf of the Department of Public Works. We have Mr. Yusuf. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. If you could say your name and your title, Yusuf.
Good morning. My name is Yusuf Kabeda. I'm the head of the Bureau of Water Wastewater. Good morning, Council President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, and members of the board. I am here to introduce and request approval for Project 1352, which is the wet weather flow planning and optimization study. And this agreement would be with the prime firm Pure Technologies. The scope of of this project is focused on our sanitary sewer collection system. Includes data analytics, hydraulic modeling, design, engineering services, and field installation of various maintenance and sensors. The purpose of the project is to analyze within our system where we might have opportunities for a flow optimization. In simple terms, in our system, there are areas or parts of the system that are underutilized and parts of the system that are overutilized. And this project is designed to assess that through a desktop analysis in the first phase, determine where these opportunities are, and then should the city deem the investment worthy, then we would go to a second phase where we would actually install various sensors throughout the system that would allow for real-time flow diversion. And the reason this is critical and very important is, as you all know, we have the modified consent decree that we are engaged in now. Potentially, this could save the city quite a bit in terms of projects that are meant to enhance or enlarge our pipe system. If we can optimize our flows, those projects may be unnecessary. So that's in short what this project is about, and we request your approval.
Thank you. And we deem this as something urgent or of emergency level?
I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as an emergency, but it is urgent in that we are in just a few weeks heading into phase 2 of the consent decree, of the modified consent decree. Yeah. And beginning the analysis now this is the perfect time. We really don't want to lose this opportunity at this stage.
And that's the justification for today's walk-on
that is correct.
Status. Thank you so much. Are there any additional questions or concerns from members of this board? Just wanted to put that on the record, Mr. Capiti. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The item's approved. As there's no new business before the desk, we will adjourn. Our next regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Estimates will occur on Wednesday, January 11th at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. Baltimore, stay safe, have a happy holidays, and we absolutely love you.
Are live, I think. Hi, Mike. We're ready. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Baltimore City Board of Estimates bid opening for December 21st, 2022. First up, I'd like to share an addenda received from the Bureau of Procurement for contract number RFQ 000111, collection of delinquent parking fines. The due date was 12/21/2022, and the new opening date for that bid will be January 11th, 2023. Again, that's RFQ 000111, collection of delinquent parking fines. That bid will be opened on January 11th, 2023. And we have 2 bids to open today. First up is General Services. Contract number GS19825R, Market Center Garage Repairs.
There is 1 bid received for this solicitation. The bidder's name is Restoration East, LLC. Total bid price, $734,242.
That number was 734,242.00?
Yes.
And is there a bid bond?
Bid bond is included.
Original 1 copy.
That bidder was Restoration East LLC. Bid amount $734,242. Next up, we have Bureau of Procurement contract number RFQ 000121, service, maintenance, and repair of Ford vehicles.
We have 1 submission for this solicitation. The bidder is Al Packers White Marsh Ford, LLC. Total bid price, $175,000.
That number was 175,000.00.
Yes.
And there's an original and
2 copies.
let's do. Great. That bidder was Al Packers White Marsh Ford LLC, and the bid amount was $175,000. And that's it.
That's our last submission.
Wow, 12:02. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in for bid opening, and our next bid opening will be on January 11th, 2023. We'll see you then. Thank you.